Author and pastor Kevin DeYoung used an illustration that I think is appropriate for Exodus 23. DeYoung says, imagine that you are parents of young kids. We'll say 3 young kids, all under the age of 6. And you as parents gather your children into the living room, and the dad begins his speech by saying, kids, Mommy and Daddy have a great surprise for you, and no, Mommy is not pregnant. Mommy and Daddy, for the last several years, have been saving our money, and Mommy and Daddy are going to take you to Disney World. We'll spare no expense because for the last 3 years we've been saving our coins. We're going to spend 10 days in Florida. We'll be going to Disney World, Universal, Epcot. We'll be going to the beach. We're going to pay for everything. It's our gift to you because we love you. We want to be around you. We will buy you all the souvenirs that you want. We'll buy you food that you want. It is going to be the greatest time. In fact, it's going to be so great that you'll probably look back on it the rest of your lives to say what a wonderful time we had together as a family. It is our gift to you. But before we go, so that it is exciting, we have one rule. We have many rules, but really it boils down to one. If you forget everything else, just remember this one rule. And we promise, if you embrace and obey this rule, you're going to have the time of your life. Listen to us. That's the rule. Mommy and Daddy at all times, in all places, should be listened to. If you do that, you're going to have a great time. All right? So if Mommy and Daddy tell you we're going to drive all night in the middle of the night, because that's what young couples do at that time. They have no sense. And we're going to drive all the way from here to Florida. We're going to get there. We promise. Believe us. Just trust us and listen. So when we tell you to look out the car window and watch the highway go by, you do that because we did it as kids and we liked it. So you do that when we tell you to put down your iPads, you put down your iPads. When we tell you to go to bed, you go to bed. When we tell you what to eat, you eat. When we tell you not to run around the park and gnaw on wood, you don't do that. You listen. And if you do, we promise you're going to have the greatest time of your life. You're not going to wake up tired and cranky. You're not going to argue with your brother or sister. You're not going to get sick. You're not going to get hurt. You're not going to get lost. And worse things could happen. If you listen to us, everything's going to be great. But if you don't, then this trip may be miserable. If you don't listen to us, you will get tired and cranky. You may get sick. You'll start to fight with your siblings. You may get hurt. And the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to make Mommy and Daddy in a bad mood. And that's going to be bad for you. So all you have to do, and we love you already. You don't do the rule to show us your love. All you have to do is listen to us to appreciate the gift that we've been given. Now that's the illustration. Now, in that illustration, what is law and what is gospel? The gospel in that story is, we're taking you to Disney World and it's a free gift. That's good news that produces great joy. That's the good news. That's the gospel in that story. The law is, listen. And they go together. Now, we don't expect you as parents to listen in order for you to prove us so that we'll love you. We already love you. We want you to listen so you appreciate the good news, so that you can appropriate the good news, so you can have a good time. Oftentimes, this is exactly the confusion that Christians have, and sad to say, as a professional theologian that teaches theologians, theologians can make a mockery or absolute confusion of the relationship between law and gospel, and obliterate it in such a way that, as Charles Spurgeon said, they're friends. And why on earth would you want to separate friends? But when you study, or you get into some Bible studies, or you study systematic theologies, there's law and there's gospel. So if you've heard it once, you've probably heard it 1,000 times. The Old Testament is law, and the New Testament is gospel. Nothing could be further from the truth. And so what we have here in Exodus 23 is law and gospel are friends. God comes to Israel on the Sinai plain after giving them the way to act redeemed. And he ends this entire 4 chapters, same conversation, the book of the covenant, by giving them blessings and curses in the form of, here's the good news, children of Israel. The good news is not only that I've redeemed you out of Egypt, that's part of it. And the good news is not only have I brought you to Sinai where I reveal myself to you as my redeemed people, the good news is there's a special destination we're going to go. And I've already mapped it out. I've had it planned for hundreds of years. I told Abraham about it. And it's a land that I'm taking you. And it's your land. I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people. In fact, the moniker is, it's the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. And it's going to be great when you get there. No more enemies, no more sickness, prosperity. Everything you touch will be blessed because of me. And I'm not doing it so that you earn my love. You already have it in my covenant. But the one thing I ask is along the way, you listen to me so that we can arrive there safely. So when I say go this route, you go this route. When I say listen to this person, you listen to this person. When I say eat what I provide you, you eat what I provide. And if you do, I promise you're going to love this life. No one's going to be able to harm you. But if you don't, you're going to have unhealth. You're going to be cursed. Your enemies are going to take your land. And you and I, the worst out of this is I'm going to be in a bad mood toward you because you haven't pleased me. And there's going to be a problem we're going to have. So all I ask is to be listened to. And by the way, redeemed of Calvary, the Father still talks that way to us. He says to us today, as members of the Abrahamic covenant, long past, that fits today, Calvary, I love you. And I have great news for you that is shown in the giving to you of my only begotten Son, who came and he died and he rose again as a gift that I'm giving. It cost you nothing. I paid for it. I'm giving you my Son, Jesus, who died on the cross and rose from the dead in part to deliver you from the land of bondage. But guess what? That's not it. I have a land I'm preparing for you. And I've gone there and I'm preparing that place for you. And I'm going to come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be. And this place is wonderful. And I'm preparing you for that destiny. But along that way, before we get to that promised land, you and I are going to take a destination. It's called this world. And there's going to be a lot of dangers, toils, and snares along the way. But I promise we're going to get to this land. And it's going to be great. It's going to be beyond the wildest description. And by the way, I'm going to be there. And I'm the happiest being in the universe, Jesus is saying. But the one thing I ask of you, Calvary, is you listen to me. Remember what my Father said? Anytime my Father talked in the Gospels, guess what he said? This is my beloved Son, whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. Good things happen when my people listen to Jesus. Good things happen when they listen to Jesus. Bad things happen when they don't. And that is the thesis, that's the crux of these verses today as we conclude the book of the covenant in Matthew chapter 23. I want you to see as we begin first some exhortations. These are the directions. This is the parents sitting the kids down now and telling them. And you see this right out of the gate in verses 20 and 21. I am going to send an angel, and then verse 21, be careful because of him and obey his voice. So that's the exhortation. Pay attention to my messenger and listen to him. Now, I want you to see, beginning in verse 21, this is important for us in our relationship with the law, because we tend to think when we say the law as stiff and rigid and inhuman, and nothing could be further from the truth. So if you look at verse 21 and following, pay attention to the personal pronouns. Look at it. It dominates the text. Pay attention to him. Obey his voice. Do not rebel against him. He will not pardon your transgressions. My name is in him. We should never forget, beloved, that behind the law is the lawgiver. Behind God's word is God. This is why A.W. Tozer, who has had a remarkable impression on my life and my own spirituality, once said that so many of God's people have become engrossed in the work of the Lord that we have forgotten the Lord of the work. And this is true with the law. Behind the law is a personal being. Now think in terms of how you relate. I do this with my kids. Now my kids do this with me. But we post notes on a refrigerator as instructions. And you might do this with your kids. Take out the dog. Take out the trash. Water the plants. And when my kids get that, that's a series of rules, a series of laws. But behind it is a personal being, a real relationship with a dad, a mom, a grandfather, a grandmother. And so behind this law is a relationship that God is covenanting with his people to say, obey the law to the extent you obey me. We've heard this before. Religion is not about rules, it's a relationship. And I understand what people mean by that, but the rules are based on a relationship. Without the rules, you'll never have the relationship. And we do this in our relationships. Friendships have to have a certain set of rules or expectations, or you won't have friends. Marriages have to have a set of expectations and rules that everyone behaves, or you won't have a healthy marriage. Parenting, child rearing, all these things. And so I want you to notice that God is reminding these people at the beginning of this section that, hey, to the extent that you obey these rules, that's not the end. The extent that you're obeying the rules, you are relating to me. You're demonstrating this love and affection to me. Now, who is this angel that is leading them all of a sudden? So we have the rules, we have the blessings, the curses, but then all of a sudden out comes this angel. Well, a lot could be said, a lot has been written, but let me just show you my cards. He's not a man. A lot of people think it's Moses. That would have particular problems as it relates to this text. Clearly, the text informs us that this angel is divine in some manner of speaking. Notice verse 20, I will send an angel before you to the place I prepared. Verse 21, listen to him. Now that sounds like the angel and Yahweh are distinct. But then you get into verse 22 and following, and they are clearly interconnected. If you carefully obey his voice and do all I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. And when my angel goes before you and brings you to all these nations, then I will blot them out. So there's a back and forth interconnectedness. And the real kicker occurs in verse 21, where the exhortation is, don't rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression. Well, we have a serious issue. According to Jesus in Mark's gospel, only God can forgive sin. And here we're told that this angel has the power to issue pardoning. This, by the way, in talking to Muslims, when I finally get to the gospel and my conversations with Muslims, is the linchpin, the hill that they die on of why they won't come to Christianity. If you have Muslim friends and you talk about religion and Christianity, you'll know that they have no problem with the idea that Jesus exists, that he was a good moral example, the fact that he even healed people they have no issue with. The issue is when we get to Jesus being able to forgive sin. Because a Muslim will confess, only God can do this. And they don't believe Jesus is God. Only God can forgive sin. So this angel either must be Yahweh himself or an emissary of Yahweh, which has led many people to believe that this is a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus. More of that in a moment. But the exhortation is, I'm sending you a messenger, an angel. Follow the angel and listen to him. So exhortation number one, that God is telling his people, and by the way, he still tells us, listen to me. Just do what I say. Beloved, in many respects, the Christian life today is quite simple. It's hard to do, but it's quite simple. All of us should listen to Jesus. If all of us listened and obeyed the words of Jesus, life would be fine. It really would. But our problem is that. I have told you, and I had to look at it again today, but one of the songs that I grew up as a child every Sunday in children's church, led by Miss Donna Williams and Miss Marilyn Wallace, two ladies that have gone on to be with Jesus, but little did they know, week after week, the impression they put upon me as a little kid. And so a shout out to all children's workers. You never know. I'm a product of your tutelage. You never know who you're going to impact. And these two ladies, every week, would take us to children's church with their little flannel boards and teach us the Bible. And before children's church let off, we would all sing the same song every week. And it's this wonderful hymn written by John Samos called Trust and Obey. The lines, or at least one, is an excerpt both from Exodus 23, Deuteronomy 6, and the Gospels. Let me recite it. Not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but our toil he doth richly repay. Not a grief or a loss, not a frown or a cross, but is blessed if we trust and obey. But we never can prove the delights of his love until all on the altar we lay. For the favor he shows and the joy he bestows are only for those who trust and obey. And then, of course, you know the line. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. Show me a verse where rebellion, saying no to Jesus and getting lippy with him is ever honored. Never is. And so our exhortation, Calvary Baptist, as a church, if we want to maintain health, if we want to maintain gospel peace, listen to the words of Jesus. The second exhortation, which is sort of an umbrella to the listening, is another predominant exhortation in both Testaments, and that is serve our God. This goes in verse 24. You will not bow down to their gods nor serve them, but you will utterly overthrow them and break their pillars into pieces. Now, what is he talking about here? Is he asking Israel, once they get into the promised land, to loot and pillage homes and do that? No. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying, and he articulates it twice, is when they get into Canaan, Canaan is going to be occupied by Canaanites. He actually mentioned half a dozen people here, and there's a lot more than that. There's all these tribes and clans that are thoroughly pagan. And each of these tribes and clans, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, all these other ites, all of them have their own version of pagan worship. Some worship on stone pillars. Some worship their pagan deities on carved images. Others on sort of a wigwam type of approach of straw altars. But they all have their way of pagan worship. And Yahweh is saying to his people, when you get into that land, you do not negotiate with terrorists. You don't compromise with pagans. You don't let those things remain. You get in there and you destroy them all. So the remnants of the past is over. You don't get along. You don't tolerate. And this is so serious that Yahweh connects it with, you serve me. And to the extent you allow that to remain, you're serving pagan deities. To give you a sense of how this parallels to our day, when our country, during times of war, goes in and conquers another country, in a symbolic act to show victory, what do? They dispel their enemy's flag on the vanguards. And they put our flag up on the pole. And it's a symbolic transfer of power to say that old guard, that old country is gone. We have defeated it. Their culture, their religion, their ways of doing things is past. We don't care. You're Americans now, Jack. We've conquered you. And it's going to be our way, our religion. And so you have these famous pictures, say, of Iwo Jima, the guys holding the flag. And it's a symbolic act of the transfer of power. You won't have, in conquered days of war, the United States flying the flag along a Pakistani flag. No, they're ripped down. We're going to show who's boss. Peace is achieved through the aggressive use of force. And this is what Yahweh is telling Israel. You're not going to compromise with pagans. No. You clean house. You get rid of all the remnants of the past. I've given you this entire land. And bit by bit, from sea to shining sea, it is going to be yours. And so, don't serve them. Serve me. This, of course, is a big deal for us today. In both Testaments, the single greatest product of someone who worships God is not a gut feeling, not a warm fuzzy. You can have that, but that is not the most predominant feature if you're truly worshiping God. The predominant feature, mentioned hundreds of times in both Old and New Testament, is service to God. In fact, the same word is used interchangeably for worship. Remember Jesus' words to Satan in the wilderness? Worship the Lord only, and Him alone will you serve. What you serve, you worship. And so today, we are locked in a cosmic battle in this world. We are locked in a battle of who will we serve. And throughout Scripture, it has this militant language, no compromise. So to Joshua, he said, Israel, you choose today who you'll serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Elijah the Tishbite on Mount Carmel, before the 450 prophets of Baal, told Israel, if Baal is God, serve him. If the Lord is God, serve him. And Jesus gets it on the act when he says, no man can have two masters. He'll either love one or hate the other. He'll be beholden to one or despise the... You cannot serve God and mammon. So there is this choice that we have. And brothers and sisters, I join you in a relentless, brutal struggle every day in this world of who you and I will serve as a church. And we have many pagan deities. not carved in stone, not on stone pillars or wooden images, but we have them in the God of sports that dominate our affection, in the God of money, sex, power, prestige, self-esteem. All of these gods bombard our affection, and many more of who will we serve. And God says, do not compromise your loyalty. Serve me. This is why he spikes the football in verse 32 and says, you will make no covenant with them and their gods. A covenant here is this contract. And now in this covenant, there are a lot of different covenants that are made. We make a marriage covenant, don't we? And a marriage covenant is between a husband and a wife, to where if my wife honors this covenant, she should expect me to honor my side of this covenant. And work contracts and so on and so forth, that two parties agree. And so here we have this covenant that God makes with his people. And the first thing we have in this exhortation of covenants is that of God threatening his people if they don't adhere to the principles of this covenant, which where verse 32 comes in mind. You will not make any covenant with them and their gods. Now, this goes back, of course, to Abraham. I don't want to lose anybody. We've been all this way before. You remember that when God sent Moses out to Egypt, he reminded him, the reason you're going to Egypt is because I made a covenant with Abraham. And I promised him that I would be his God, and upon him all the nations of the earth would be blessed if they came by faith. I promised it to his son Isaac and to Jacob and I'm promising it to you, Moses, and you take that to the children of Israel because I keep my promises. And he promises that to us. And every time these Israelites would circumcise a son, they would be reminded of their contractual obligations. So it is fully within our means when we make a covenant with another person that we do our job but expect them to hold up at their end of the bargain. And God here threatens his people if they don't adhere to the covenant. It's, again, to use our parents' illustration, we're going to Disney World, but if you don't listen, here are the things you can expect. And so it is with God. Now, you can do your own study of this. You'll find if you study, for example, Leviticus, and you read Leviticus 26, this is a review of Exodus 23. They're going in the land the second time, and God is warning his children. In Exodus 26, the first 13 verses are promises of blessings if they obey. But then, from verses 14 through 46, are God threatening his children if they don't. Then if you skip to Deuteronomy chapter 28, the same thing occurs. In the first 14 verses are promises of blessing if children adhere to the covenant. But then verses 15 through 68 are threats to Israel if they don't listen. Here in Exodus 23, there's more good than bad, but nevertheless, here is a God that is not to be trifled with. And he says many threats. Verse 21, if you don't listen, you will not be pardoned in sin. Then the whole section, he ends with warnings. You will not dwell in the land if you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, the last verse, it will be a snare to you. Now, what is a snare? Not a drum. A snare here is a trap that was used to trap little animals. Sometimes a snare was a hole dug in the ground and bulrushes were put over and the animal would drop in the pit. But typically, an animal was baited. It was allured into a box held up by a stick. And when it got to the bait, there would be a little rope that would snare the leg of the animal. And this is a trap a little trap that God is telling his people, when you go into the land, there are all sorts of little traps that can ensnare you in sin. Watch out for them. And you and I know this, right? As I referred to the hymn writer, John Newton, in this world there's many dangers, toils, and snares. It typically is not the big sins that get us, is it? It's the day-to-day encumbrances that knock us off the race, that slowly allure us to the world, and all of a sudden we look more like the world than we do God's people. Many, many snares are waiting, and God says, be mindful. Then the story ends with the promises. It was absolutely appropriate and timely that we sang this hymn that I grew up with, Standing on the Promises. If you're ever in doubt and you need medicine for your soul, go to the promises. Because one thing you can take to the bank is God never lies. He doesn't sort of bat 1,000. He never wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. He doesn't have good days and bad days. His promises are always true. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we, as Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones said, are prone to listen to ourselves more than talk to ourselves. And we become passive agents, and we listen to the enemy, and we listen to our own inclinations, rather than talk to ourselves what God has already promised. Well, we would know these big sins. The devil, if he came to us and said, hi, Brian, I'm the devil. I want to make your life a miserable hell. Sign up here. Then none of us would do that. But the devil is alluring. Our enemy is seductive. And so there are all these snares here in the world. And we have the promises here if we do listen. Verse 20. I will send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you the place that I've prepared. To bring you to the place I prepared. Does that ring a bell? To bring you, my people, to the place I've prepared. You see how this is for us today? And then we have verse 23. I will blot them out, that's your enemies, and prepare a place for you. There are other blessings of promise if we obey. Verse 22, if you obey, I will be an enemy to your enemies. My, oh my. The kids today have a new moniker about a best friend. They call it ride or die, in your corner. Isn't it wonderful that we can all walk out of these doors in just a few moments to know that Yahweh is in our corner? Look at that again. I will be an enemy to your enemies. You want good news? That Yahweh is going to fight for you. I will be an enemy to your enemies. And by the way, isn't that what God said to Abraham long ago? Him who dishonors you, I will curse. So it's a universal truth throughout the Scriptures. If they mess with you, they've got to mess with me, Yahweh is saying to his people. Then in verse 25 and following, we have this series of blessings. You can look at it for yourself. No miscarriages, no infertility, no early deaths. I will confuse your enemies and make them run away. I'll send hornets and drive them out. And God gives a list of nations here with these blessings to his people. It's a sampling of the Canaanites who would be in the land at the time. But he tells them, I'm going to look out for you, and little by little, this entire land is going to be yours. And we would say, from sea to shining sea. He promises them food. He promises them abundance of rain. He promises them health. He promises them fertility. He promises them long life. He promises them military success. He promises them national success only if they would obey. And he does the same to us today as his people. What a wonderful, precious hymn, Standing on the Promises. I would commit that hymn to you as it relates to chapter 23, to go home and read it, if not sing it and meditate on its promises. But then, what does this all mean for us today as Calvary Baptist Church in 2024? God has provided us a messenger whose name is Jesus. And as I said a moment ago, every time the Father speaks, once at the baptism of Jesus and once at the transfiguration, but the only time the Father audibly speaks that we know of, that's recorded, is about His Son and our role in His Son. This is my beloved Son, whom I'm well pleased. Listen to Him. Now that has implications. If we're not listening to the Son whom the Father is well pleased with, we cannot please the Father, right? So He is God's messenger. Listen to Him. He should be listened to. And what does Jesus say to His people that mirrors Exodus 23? He tells us, I am always with you, even unto the end of the age. In John 14, He said, I'm going to prepare a place for you, and I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be. And just a few verses later, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except by going through me. If you're here today and you're not a Christian, and you know you're not a Christian, you're halfway to becoming a Christian if you simply believe in Jesus. No one can come to the Father except by going through Him. And one of my favorite lines in John 14, 1 through 6, probably my favorite, is where Jesus says, if this were not so, I would have told you. I'm not selling you a bridge. I'm not lying. Everything I'm saying here about what I'm doing, preparing a place, receiving you to myself, where I am, there you're going to be. I wouldn't deceive you. I tell you if this was a pipe dream. This is where it's all going. This is where Calvary is marching to, you see. And finally, one last passage before we go. I'd like you to turn with me to John 17. Now, John 17, if you'll excuse me for being a bit of a nerd for a moment. John 17 is the true Lord's Prayer. So I know when we quote this from time to time at Calvary, Our Father who are in heaven, that is often titled the Lord's Prayer, and that's okay. We'll still be friends if you say it. Just understanding that Jesus could not pray that prayer, right? He couldn't ask to be forgiven of His debts. He's perfect and sinless. That prayer comes as a response of His disciples asking, teach us to pray. And He says, here's a model how you can pray. So we call it the Lord's Prayer, but as long as we understand, Jesus never prayed that prayer for Himself. But He does pray a prayer for Himself. The true Lord's Prayer is in John 17. Now I want you to get the context here, because it's absolutely gorgeous. Jesus is getting ready to die. He knows this. He has just benedicted the greatest holiday in Israel, the Passover. And he has benedicted that night with that final 4-cheer wine and 4-fold meal. And they went out and sung a hymn, and now he's in the garden. His 3 closest friends are fast asleep because they couldn't endure and stay up when he asked them to. In a few moments, they'll all run like whipped hounds. They'll reject him. One will actually deny even knowing him. And with all that, headed for the cross, the greatest manifestation of the ages of God's redemptive plan. It is on that cross that Jesus is full aware what will happen. It is on that cross where the sinless Son of God, who cannot even allow sin in his presence, he's that holy, will now willingly take all of our sin on him. And if that's not bad, because he knows he's holy, because he knows his Father's holy, and what his Father has to do with sin, his Father will now judge him as if he is a sinner for our sin. And that judgment, the ultimate judgment, as the Bible from Old to New Testaments, is separation from God. Hence, my God, why have you forsaken me? So all this is on the mind of Jesus when he prays this prayer. It is remarkable in its beauty. The prayer is divided in 3 sections. First, Jesus, right out of the gate, prays for himself. Then he turns his attention and he prays for those disciples that have got to go through this as well, the ones there. But beginning in verse 20, it is clear he shifts and he prays for future disciples, or to make it personal, he prays for Calvary Baptist Church. Right there in the garden on the eve of the worst day and the best day in human redemptive history. He's thinking of us. And notice the covenantal language of Exodus 23 in this prayer. I'll begin in verse 20. I am not praying only on their behalf, but also on behalf of those who believe in me through their testimony, that they will all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I am you. I pray that they will be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me. The glory you gave to me, I have given to them, that they may be one, just as we are one. Do you see the beautiful intimacy here? What he's praying for, oneness. Verse 23, I in them and you in me, that they may be completely one, so that the world will know that you sent me and you have loved them just as you love me. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, so that they can see my glory that you gave me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Now, this is a sermon all in a sermon, so bid me a little patience. There's a few minutes left. For all those in the room today, it's Father's Day. My father died many, many years ago. I miss him terribly. And so on a day like today, if your father's not around and he's gone, you reminisce. Let me just say, based upon this verse alone, if he or your father or any family member, and some of you are suffering right now with sorrow and bereavement, and that is okay, you're human in this world. They are more alive than you are. And if you consider verse 24 and what is going on right now and what awaits us, it is remarkable and quite honestly indescribable for me to try to communicate it with you. Listen to it again. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am. And here's the reason. Here's what's going on in glory right now. So that they can see my glory that you gave me before the foundation of the world because you love me. So every one of your dead saints and family members who are not dead are actually in the presence of Jesus, beholding his glory in ways that we are not. And that's the whole purpose and what Jesus is praying and what his cross and resurrection achieved. So there's good news there. And then I love this touching line. You wonder if this is the last thing he said before he was arrested. Righteous Father, Even if the world does not know you, I know you, and these men know that you sent me. I made known your name to them and will continue to make it known, so that the love you have loved me may be in them and I may be in them. The law and the gospel are friends. One person, I believe it was Octavius Winslow, a 19th century scholar, who said, 2 thieves died with Jesus, and let those thieves of the law and the gospel be our lesson. One thief is there to teach us never to presume, and the other is there to teach us never to despair. One shows you justice under the law when you don't listen. The other shows you the gospel of grace, whom God gives you this free and gift salvation. Law and gospel are beautiful friends. Now let's go live this sermon. Our Father, I thank you for these dear people, for their love for you, their love of your word. And Father, now as we enter another aspect of our worship where we have heard the word, now we see it on display with these elements. God, we see justice and mercy. We see law and grace. We see justice and justification all together. We see forgiveness full and free, but a God that finally takes care of all sin. And we glory in that. In the name of Jesus our Lord and for his sake, amen.